The cantina on Station Nexus 7 was the kind of place where questions weren't asked and credits talked louder than words. Neon lights flickered through clouds of purple smoke from a dozen different worlds, casting strange shadows on the walls. The air tasted of metal and mystery, thick with the breath of creatures from every corner of the galaxy. In the darkest corner, where the light barely reached, sat a figure that made even the toughest smugglers look twice. Vextal was a mountain of scarred flesh and broken dreams. His 6 massive arms rested on a table that groaned under his weight, each limb telling a story of violence written in old wounds and fresh scars. His compound eyes, like black diamonds, reflected the cantina's lights in 1,000 tiny fragments. The Krillian warrior had seen better days. His chitinous armor, once polished to mirror brightness, now bore the dull patina of too many battles. Deep gouges ran across his chest, where plasma bolts had found their mark. His left shoulder still ached from the vegan crystal wars, and his right hand trembled slightly from nerve damage earned in the siege of Altera around him. The cantina buzzed with the usual mix of traders, pirates, and mercenaries. A Zephyrian merchant argued loudly with a mechanical bartender whose circuits sparked with every movement. The Bladewing assassins played cards in a booth, their razor-sharp feathers clicking against the table. Near the bar, a group of human smugglers laughed over their drinks, their voices cutting through the alien chatter like knives through silk. It was those human voices that had drawn the young recruits to Vextal's stable. Word traveled fast in places like this, and everyone knew the old Krillian had stories to tell. Stories about the species that had changed everything. Zorith was the first to approach, her aquatic features glistening under the cantina's lights. Her gills fluttered nervously as she spoke, the universal translator around her neck crackling with static. Behind her came Kelm, his desert world heritage obvious in his sand-colored skin and triple-jointed limbs. The crystal creature Thisis followed last, her transparent body refracting the neon lights into rainbow patterns.
Veterans,
Zorith said, her voice carrying the musical quality of her water world origins. We've heard the stories about the Terran Wars, about what happened out there in the dark between the stars. Vextal didn't look up from his drink. The neural stimulant inside glowed blue-green, casting eerie shadows on his scarred face. He'd been trying to forget for cycles now, drowning his memories in chemicals and alcohol. But the memories always came back. Stories, he rumbled, his voice like rocks grinding together. Everyone wants stories. Kelm shifted his weight, his desert-born instincts making him uneasy in the enclosed space. The recruitment officers say the humans are just another species, soft, weak, bound to their single world. That got a reaction. Vextal's mandibles clicked together in what might. It'd been laughter, but there was no humor in it. His compound eyes fixed on the young desert warrior, and Kelm took an involuntary step back. Soft Vextal repeated, tasting the word like poison. Weak. He reached for his drink with one massive hand while the others drummed against the table. The sound was like distant thunder, and conversations at nearby tables began to quiet. I thought the same thing once, he continued, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent cantina. 20 cycles I'd been fighting. 20 cycles of conquest and glory. I'd walked on the crystal beaches of Zarian after we'd cracked their hive mind like an egg. I'd seen the ice warriors of Belgon melt into steam under our plasma cannons, the shapeshifters of the void stations. They learned to fear the sound of Krillian war drums. Tice's crystalline form chimed softly as she moved closer. Humans were different? Different. Vextal's laugh was like breaking glass. That's one word for it. He drained his drink in one massive gulp, then slammed the empty container down with enough force to crack the table. The sound echoed through the cantina like a gunshot. I was with the 4th Conquest Fleet when we first encountered them. Routine. Expansion operation. Caintel said they were a young species, barely out of their gravity well. One world, a few scattered colonies, primitive weapons. The kind of job we'd done 100 times before. His eyes grew distant, staring at something only he could see. Our fleet admiral, Korthver the Merciless. He was so confident he didn't even bring the full fleet. Said it would be over in a day. Said we'd be back at base drinking victory wine before the next solar cycle. The recruits leaned closer, drawn in despite themselves. Around them, the cantina had gone completely quiet. Even the bartender had stopped his eternal cleaning to listen. But they were ready for us, Vextel whispered, and somehow his quiet voice carried more menace than any shout. Somehow, impossibly, they were ready. Vextel's massive form seemed to shrink as the memories took hold. His 6 arms trembled slightly, and the recruits could see something they'd never expected from the legendary warrior Fear. Kepler 4 for 2b, he said, the name falling from his mandibles like a curse. A nothing world on the edge of human space. Red dirt, thin air, and a mining operation that barely kept the lights on. Our scouts said it wasn't even worth the fuel to conquer. The old warrior's compound eyes reflected the cantina's flickering lights as he stared into the past. But Command wanted to send a message. Show the humans what happened to species that didn't bow to the Krillian Empire. So they sent us the Crimson Talon Battalion. Elite shock troops. We'd never lost a battle. Zorith's gills fluttered nervously. How many of you were there? 2,000 warriors. Orbital support ships? Plasma artillery? Enough firepower to glass a continent? Vextel's mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter laughter. Against 200 humans in a mining colony that looked like it would blow over in a strong wind. He reached for another drink, his scarred hands steady, despite the tremor in his voice. The intelligence briefing was simple. Human colonial marines, standard equipment, led by some. Nobody sergeant named Lee Dong-wook? Farm boy from Earth, they said. Joined the service to see the galaxy. Cantina's background noise faded as other patrons strained to listen. Word was spreading through the station's networks. The old Krillian was telling war stories again. Came out of hyperspace, expecting to find them hiding in bunkers, maybe sending surrender signals. Instead, their comm channels were silent. Not a single transmission. Just ... quiet. Vextel's eyes focused on something beyond the cantina walls. That should have been the first warning. In 20 cycles of conquest, no species had ever gone quiet when our fleet arrived. They screamed, they begged, they threatened, but the humans, nothing. The veteran's claws scraped against the metal table, leaving deep grooves. Admiral Korthfer ordered standard bombardment. Precision strikes on their defensive positions, communication arrays, power generators. Everything went exactly as planned. By the time our dropships launched, the colony looked like broken glass scattered across the red dirt. Kelm shifted uncomfortably. Then why do you look like you've seen ghosts? Because that's when we learned the first rule of fighting humans, Vextel replied. They don't fight fair. The old warrior's voice dropped too, barely above a whisper, forcing everyone to lean closer. The dropships went in low and fast, standard. Combat deployment. Alpha Company hit the main complex. Beta took the mining facilities. Gamma secured the perimeter. Perfect execution. We'd done it 1,000 times before. Mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of deep agitation among his species. But as soon as the first transport touched down, everything went wrong. The landing pad wasn't damaged from our bombardment. It was rigged. Private Kim Hae-won, this tiny human who looked like she should be in school, not holding a rifle, had spent 3 days turning mining explosives into the most beautiful death trap I'd ever seen. The recruits exchanged glances. Beauty and death weren't words usually spoken together. The explosion took out our entire first wave. Warriors gone in a flash of fire and twisted metal. But that wasn't the worst part. Vextel's eyes seemed to lose focus. The worst part was watching that human girl die. He paused, gathering himself. She was trapped in the blast, burned, broken. Any rational being would have surrendered, begged for medical help. Instead, she crawled to a comm station and started calling out positions. Our positions. She was guiding her people to safety while she died. Tice's crystalline form flickered with distress. That's not possible. No species fights to the death for strangers. Humans do, Vextel said simply. And that's when I learned the second rule. They don't see each other as strangers. The old warrior's voice gained strength as he continued. Captain Park Ji-hoon was leading the defense from the main complex. Professional soldier. Decorated veteran. the kind of officer who reads tactical manuals for fun. When our forces broke through the outer perimeter, he had a choice: retreat to the inner defenses or make a stand. Vexel's mandibles spread in what might have been a smile, but there was no humor in it. He chose option 3, the impossible option. He grabbed a comm unit and started broadcasting his exact location to our artillery teams. Not surrender terms, not requests for mercy, grid coordinates. The cantina had gone completely silent now. Even the mechanical bartender had stopped its eternal cleaning. He thought it was a trap at first. No commander gives away his position, unless he's trying to lure you into an ambush. So he hesitated. Fatal mistake. The veteran's claws drummed against the table. Park wasn't setting a trap. He was calling down fire on himself. Kelm's desert-adapted eyes widened. Suicide strategy, Vexel corrected. Brilliant, insane strategy. Our command post was in the same building, trying to coordinate the assault. Park knew we'd moved our headquarters forward to maintain communications, so he painted a target on his own head to take us out. The old warrior's voice carried something like admiration. His last transmission was beautiful in its simplicity. No speeches, no final words to loved ones, just map coordinates repeated 3 times to make sure we heard them clearly. Then he cut the channel and waited. Zorth's gills had stopped fluttering entirely. Did it work? Our orbital bombardment turned that entire section into a crater. Took out our command structure, our communications array, and half our officer corps, including Captain Park Jahoon, who died exactly where he said he would. Vexel drained his drink and signaled for another. That's when the real fighting began. Because humans don't just die, they die angry. The neural stimulant in Vexel's glass glowed brighter as his agitation increased. The old warrior's compound eyes seemed to fracture the cantina's light into 1,000 painful memories. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of nightmares that never faded. Proxima Station, he said, and the name hung in the air, like a death sentence. Kepler taught us humans could fight. Proxima taught us they could hate. The recruits shifted uncomfortably as Vexel's massive form seemed to fold in on itself. Even in the dim cantina light, they could see new scars. Across his chitinous armor, deeper, more jagged than the others. It was supposed to be our crowning victory. The station controlled 3 jump routes and 12 mining operations. Take it, and we'd cut the human colonies off from Earth. Simple siege warfare, surround, starve, conquer. Vexel's mandibles clicked in a rhythm that sounded almost like mourning. Commander Choi Minho was running the defense. Career military, 40 years of service. The kind of officer who scheduled his meals and timed his sleep. Everything by regulation, everything by the book. The old warrior gestured with one scarred arm toward the cantina's viewport, where stars twinkled like distant eyes. The station itself was a monster. 12 kilometers of metal and ceramic spinning in the void. Fusion reactors, manufacturing bays, enough firepower to hold off a fleet. But we had 2 fleets. Zorth's gills fluttered nervously. Said it took 3 months? 3 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days? Vexel replied with the precision of someone who'd counted every hour. At first, it went exactly as planned. We surrounded the station, cut off their supply lines, started picking off their patrol ships. Standard siege tactics that had worked on 100 worlds. The veteran's voice grew thoughtful. Choi played it perfectly. Rotated his defenses, conserved ammunition, kept morale high with regular broadcasts to the families on the colony. Below, professional to the core. He paused, his massive hands clenching and unclenching. His daughter, Lieutenant Yoon Sojin, was his communications officer. 26 years old, fresh from the academy, bright as a nova, and twice as determined. She looked just like her father, same stubborn jaw, same eyes that missed nothing. The cantina's background noise faded to nothing as other patrons strained to listen. The mechanical bartender had given up all pretense of working, its optical sensors focused entirely on the old Krillian. Week 2 of the siege, we decided to test their resolve, sent sniper teams and fast attack craft to harass their supply runs. Psychological warfare, make them afraid to leave the station. Vexel's compound eyes seemed to dim. One of our best shooters, Kexmore the Silent, got a clean shot during a routine supply transfer. The old warrior's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The projectile hit Lieutenant Yoon in the chest as she was supervising the loading of medical supplies. Clean kill shot from 3 kilometers out. She died instantly. Kelm leaned forward. That should have broken their morale. Should have, Vexthal agreed. Any rational species would have started making mistakes. Let grief cloud their judgment. His mandibles spread in something that wasn't quite a smile. But humans aren't rational when they mourn. The veteran's claws scraped against the table, leaving fresh gouges in the metal. The first sign something had changed was the silence. For 6 hours after Yoon's death, not a single transmission came from the station. Our intelligence teams thought maybe Choi had suffered a breakdown, lost control of his command. Voice gained an edge of something like fear. Then the mining lasers started firing. Tice's crystalline form chimed with confusion. Mining equipment? Against warships? Industrial mining lasers designed to cut through asteroids. It's completely unsuitable for combat. Too slow to track, too much power drain, no targeting systems. The old warrior's eyes gleamed. But Corporal Han Min-soo was an engineer before he joined the military. He figured out how to chain the reactor outputs, create focused pulses that could punch through our cruiser armor. The recruits exchanged nervous glances. Improvised weapons were one thing, but turning industrial equipment into artillery suggested a level of creativity that was deeply unsettling. That was just the beginning, Vexthal continued. Private Lim the Jin, barely 19 years old, started leading raids on our blockade ships. Not with fighters or assault craft, with maintenance pods. Tiny one-person vehicles designed for external repairs. His voice carried a note of professional admiration. She'd wait until our patrol schedules aligned, then drift in with the space debris. The pods had no weapons, no shields, no life support beyond a few hours of oxygen, but they could carry shaped charges. Zorith's gills stopped fluttering entirely. She was attacking warships in maintenance pods. 17 successful raids in 2 weeks. Every time we thought we'd figured out her pattern, she'd change tactics. Sometimes she'd plant explosives on our sensor arrays. Sometimes she'd jam our communications relays. Once, she actually crawled through our waste disposal system to plant charges in a destroyer's engine room. Vexthal's mandibles clicked rapidly. But the worst part wasn't the attacks themselves. It was what they did to us psychologically. Every patrol became a nightmare. Every piece of floating debris could be another human with a bomb and nothing left to lose. The old warrior's voice grew distant again. By the 3rd month, we weren't besieging the station anymore. We were trapped outside it, afraid to get close, afraid to pull back. Commander Choi had turned his grief into a weapon more effective than any plasma cannon. He gestured toward the cantina's ceiling with one massive arm. When we finally breached the outer ring, we found they'd spent weeks preparing for us. Every corridor was a kill zone, every junction rigged with explosives, every room turned into a fortress. Vexthal's compound eyes focused on each recruit in turn, and in the command center, waiting for us like he'd been expecting visitors for tea, was Commander Choi Minho. Still in full dress uniform, still every inch the professional officer, except for his eyes. The veteran's voice dropped to barely a whisper. His eyes burned like dying stars. The bartender's mechanical arm whirred as it slid another glowing drink across the table to Vextel. The old warrior's 6 hands shook as he reached for it, and the recruits noticed something they'd never seen before: the legendary Krillian veteran was afraid to continue his story. 6 months after Proxima, he began, his voice hollow. We thought we understood humans, thought we'd learned their patterns. Aggressive defense, emotional responses, willing to die for abstract concepts like honor and duty. Vextel's compound eyes reflected the cantina's neon lights like fractured mirrors. We were wrong. We'd only seen them fight for causes. We hadn't seen them fight for each other. The old warrior's mandibles clicked nervously as he continued. The Zarian Nebula was supposed to be safe space, neutral territory, where both sides could operate without interference. Our deep space reconnaissance ships patrolled the outer edges, gathering intelligence on human supply lines. He paused, staring into his drink as if it held answers to questions he didn't want to ask. Specialist Kangdu Haiyan was running routine communications checks when his scout ship suffered a reactor malfunction. Kid was barely old enough to shave, fresh out of technical training. The kind of soldier you forget 5 minutes after meeting. Him. Zorith leaned forward, her aquatic features glistening. What made him special? Nothing, Vextel replied flatly. That's what made what happened next so terrifying. The veteran's scarred hands gestured toward the cantina's viewport. The stars seemed to watch like silent witnesses. Our patrol ship, the Darkwing, found his vessel drifting dead in space. Standard salvage operation: board the craft, check for survivors, recover any useful intelligence. His voice took on the mechanical tone of someone reciting a report. Kong was unconscious in the communications bay, suffering from radiation exposure but alive. No weapons, no classified data, no strategic value whatsoever. Just a scared kid who'd gotten unlucky with a faulty reactor core. Kelm's deserted eyes narrowed. You said standard procedure was interrogation. 3 days in our holding cells while the intelligence officers tried to squeeze information out of him? Vexel confirmed, but Kang didn't know anything worth knowing. Supply schedules for frontier colonies, frequencies for scout ships, basic technical specifications for outdated equipment. Nothing that would change the course of the war. The old warrior's compound eyes seemed to lose focus as he stared into the past. Commander Vorthak was ready to space him. One less human to worry about, and it would send a message to other prisoners. But then long-range sensors started screaming. Vexel's mandibles spread in something that might have been a smile, but there was no humor in it. 12 destroyers, dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. For heavy cruisers with enough firepower to crack a moon. And leading them all, the dreadnought indomitable Admiral Song Haijin's flagship. The recruits exchanged nervous glances. Even species that had never fought humans knew that name. Song Haijin, the Iron Admiral, whose fleet had never lost a battle. Our base commander, General Klexther, couldn't believe it. Vextel continued. An entire battle group for one communications technician. He sent a standard diplomatic message: we have your man. Withdraw your fleet, and we'll negotiate his release. The veteran's voice shifted. It's taken on the clipped tones of military communications. The response came directly from Admiral Song herself. No diplomatic protocol, no negotiation offers. It's just 8 words. You have our brother. Return him unharmed. Vextel's claws scraped against the table, leaving fresh gouges in the metal. General Klexer actually laughed. Our base was built inside a hollowed-out asteroid, surrounded by defense platforms and shield generators. We had enough firepower to hold off a full invasion fleet. The old warrior's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. What we didn't have was understanding. We thought the humans were bluffing. Thought they'd eventually realize one soldier wasn't worth a battle that would cost thousands of lives. Tice's crystalline form chimed softly. But they weren't bluffing. Weren't even negotiating, Vexel corrected. While we were trying to figure out their strategy, Captain Bae Suman was already inside our perimeter with a squadron of stealth fighters. Ghost ships, they called them. Hulls coated with sensor dampening. Materials, engines tuned to run silent. His mandibles clicked rapidly as the memories came flooding back. The first we knew about the infiltration was when our outer sensor grid went dark. Not destroyed, surgically disabled. One by one, our early warning systems just ... stopped working. Cantina had gone completely silent now. Even the background hum of the station's life support system seemed muted. Commander Otejang and his Marines came through the old mining tunnels. Vexel continued. Passages we'd forgotten existed, sealed off decades ago when the asteroid was first hollowed out. They'd studied our base layout, found blueprints we didn't know still existed. The veteran's voice carried a note of professional admiration. Perfect insertion, perfect timing. They hit our detention level first, not to cause maximum damage, but to secure their objective. Specialist Kang was free and on his way to extraction before we even knew we were under attack. Kelm's eyes widened. They planned the entire operation around rescuing one person. That's what we thought too, Vexel replied. But we were wrong. Again, the rescue was just the beginning. The old warrior's compound eyes focused on each recruit in turn. Major Shinjae-1's demolition teams had been busy while we were distracted by the rescue operation. They didn't just extract their man and leave. They systematically destroyed every weapons platform, every shield generator, every piece of military equipment in the base. His voice grew quieter, more thoughtful. But they didn't touch the living quarters, didn't damage the medical bay or the mess halls. They could have killed us all, but they chose not to. They just wanted to make sure we couldn't threaten their people again. Vexel drained his drink and set the empty glass down with a sound like breaking dreams. The message they left in our computer systems was simple. Touch our people again. And next time, we won't be so gentle. The recruits sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they'd heard. They risked an entire battle group, Zorith whispered. For one communications technician. They didn't risk it, Vexel corrected. They never had any doubt they'd succeed, because they weren't fighting for strategic advantage or territorial gain. They were fighting for family. The cantina had transformed into something resembling a tomb. One by one, the other patrons had slipped away, unwilling to hear truths that made their own species seem small and fragile. Only the recruits remained, drawn by morbid fascination to the old warrior's final tale. Vexel's massive form seemed to have aged decades in the telling. His compound eyes had lost their fire, replaced by the hollow stare of someone who'd seen too much and understood too little, too late. 2 more years, he said, his voice like the whisper of solar wind through dead space. It's 2 more years. What we told ourselves were victories. We took the mining colonies of Rigel 7, destroyed the human research station at Alpha Prime, captured 3 more systems and called ourselves conquerors. The old warrior's mandibles clicked in a rhythm that sounded like counting the dead. But every battle was harder than the last. Every victory cost more blood than the one before. We were winning the war and losing ourselves. Zorith's gills fluttered weakly. Surely the humans were weakening too. That's what we told ourselves, Vexel replied. Our intelligence reports showed their fleet strength declining their colonies, evacuating their military, stretched to the breaking point. On paper, we were crushing them. He gestured toward the cantina's viewport with one scarred arm. But paper doesn't scream when it burns. Paper doesn't fight back with improvised weapons and impossible tactics. Paper doesn't turn every retreat into an ambush and every defeat into a lesson. The veteran's voice grew distant as he stared into the starfield beyond the station. The humans were learning. Every battle taught them something new about us, our weaknesses, our blind spots, our predictable patterns. While we celebrated victories, they were preparing for the next encounter. Kelm shifted uncomfortably in his seat. What changed? Wolf 359. Vexel said, and the name fell from his mandibles like a death sentence. Fleet Admiral Kethmer the Conqueror had been hunting the main human battle group for months, finally cornered them in a system with only one jump point, a gravity well so deep that escape was impossible. The old warrior's claws scraped against the table as his hands clenched. Perfect tactical situation. We had them outnumbered 3-1, trapped like animals in a cage. Kethmer was already composing his victory message to the High Command. Vextel's compound eyes seemed to fracture the cantina's dim lighting into 1,000 painful shards. The human commander was Commodore Chin Inwoo, career officer, decorated. Veteran, the kind of leader who'd pulled his people through a dozen impossible situations. Smart, experienced, and now completely trapped. The veteran paused, reaching for his drink with hands that trembled despite his best efforts. Standard military doctrine says a trapped enemy will try to negotiate. Offer surrender terms. Look for diplomatic solutions. Buy time for rescue that will never come. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Chen sent exactly one transmission before the battle began. For words that still wake me from sleep cycles. For Earth. For family. For everyone we've lost. Tice's crystalline form chimed with confusion. That's not a surrender. It's a war cry, Vexel corrected. The most terrifying war cry I've ever heard because it came from someone who'd already decided to die. The old warrior's mandibles spread in something that wasn't quite a smile. What happened next shouldn't have been possible. Physics says a smaller force can't defeat a larger one through direct assault. Mathematics says trapped ships can't break through superior numbers. Logic says rational beings don't throw their lives away for abstract concepts. His voice gained an edge of something like awe, but humans aren't bound by logic. The entire battle group came straight at us, not trying to escape, not looking for weaknesses in our formation. It's just a straight, impossible charge into the teeth of our firepower. Vextel's compound eyes reflected the cantina's lights like dying stars. Every ship fought like it was the last ship in the fleet. Every pilot flew like the fate of their entire species depended on their actions alone. They rammed our vessels when their weapons failed, used their own ships as missiles when their engines died. The veteran's voice cracked with something that might have been emotion. Commodore Chen's flagship, the Defiant, took 17 direct hits from our plasma cannons. The ship was a flying wreck. Atmosphere venting, hull breached in a dozen places. Any rational commander would have ejected, saved their crew, lived to fight another day. He paused, gathering himself. Instead, Chen rerouted all remaining power to the engines and drove that dying ship straight into our command dreadnought. Now the explosion lit up the entire system like a newborn star. The recruits sat in stunned silence, trying to process the implications of what they'd heard. We won, Vextel continued, his voice hollow. Destroyed their entire fleet, captured or killed every human in the system. Complete tactical victory. The kind of battle that ends wars and breaks enemy morale forever. His mandibles clicked in. Bitter laughter. But when the debris cleared and the casualty reports came in, we'd lost 60% of our task force. Against an enemy that should have been helpless. Against opponents who were already defeated before the first shot was fired. The old warrior's voice dropped to barely a whisper. That night, alone in his command chamber, Fleet Admiral Kethmer, the Conqueror did something unprecedented in Krillian military history. He opened a secure channel to the High Command and recommended immediate peace negotiations. Kelm's eyes widened. He gave up. After a victory, he understood. Vextel corrected. For the first time in the war, one of our commanders truly understood what we were fighting. The veteran struggled to his feet, his massive form casting long shadows across the empty cantina. To defeat humanity completely, we would have had to kill every last one of them. Not just their military, not just their colonies, but every man, woman, and child in their entire species. Because as long as even one human remained alive, they would keep fighting, keep remembering, keep coming for us. His voice carried the weight of terrible certainty. Even if we'd somehow managed that genocide, what would we have become in the process? What kind of monsters would we have had to turn into to destroy a species whose only crime was loving each other too much? Vextel dropped a handful of credits on the table, the metal chiming against the scarred surface. So let me leave you younglings with one final piece of advice. If you ever find yourself facing humans in battle, pray that they have something to lose. Pray they have families waiting at home, colonies to protect, futures to build. He moved toward the cantina's exit, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. At the doorway, He paused and looked back at the recruits with eyes that had seen the birth and death of empires. Because humans with nothing left to lose are the most dangerous predators this galaxy has ever produced.
Oh.
They don't fight for victory, or glory, or conquest. They fight for love. Love, younglings, is the most powerful weapon in the universe. The old warrior disappeared into the station's corridors, leaving behind only the fading echo of his footsteps and the terrible weight of understanding. Zorith was the first to speak. Her voice barely above a whisper. Do you think he was telling the truth? Kelm stared at the credits Vextel had left behind. Not just payment for his drinks, but enough to cover everyone's tab for the night. Look at the scars on those coins, he said quietly. Plasma burns, the same kind that marked his armor. Tice's crystalline form flickered with realization. He was there. At Wolf 359, he saw it all happen. The three recruits sat in contemplative silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the stories they'd heard. Outside the cantina's viewport, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the fears and hopes of the species that moved between them. But somewhere in that vast darkness, humanity continued its expansion into the galaxy, carrying with them the terrible and beautiful gift that made them both the most dangerous and most precious species among the stars, their capacity to love without reservation, act without surrender, and die without regret for the sake of strangers they called family. The end.